Hey guys, I have a really quick announcement. If you don't want to watch the announcement or what all this is, just skip to this time. Otherwise, first things first, I just want to say thank you to all of you guys. 2025 has been a really rough year. I lost both my mom and my grandmother. So I'm really just trying to say I'm really appreciative for you guys. You guys are my family. I literally love you guys to death. I know I've been a little bit slow on the uploads for the past month, but it's been a long year and I just needed to kind of bring it back down to earth and just kind of reset so that going into January can hit the ground running. Like I said, I got an exciting announcement for you guys and other exciting announcements for you guys as well. But the first thing I just want to say from the bottom of my heart was thank you to all of you. Even though it might not be apparent or might not seem that way, you guys do so much for me just by watching videos and enjoying them or falling asleep to them. And all of that means so much to me. So that part is from the bottom of my heart. Thank you to all of you. I love you guys to death. I love you guys more than anything. Now, time for the exciting announcements. First things first, I'm going to be remastering some of the old videos, which means, yes, you know that video that you hate that I did that one time and I totally bombed? What if I did it again, but better? And I'm going to do it better, and I'm going to crank out some remasters, but it's not going to fill the time slot of new stories. So it's not like I'm going to just do remasters and avoid doing new stories. I'm just going to throw remasters in as we keep doing new stories together, us and me. The next part is multi-parts. I remember doing like a couple part 1 through 3s, those little videos with you guys earlier this year. I'm going to be returning to doing that, so I've got a really cool what if Anakin, Luke, and Rey swapped eras, Rey Clone Wars, Anakin OT, and then Luke in the sequels. It's a really cool timeline switch, and I'm going to do that at some point, probably in January, but it's a 1 through 3-parter that I'm really excited for. The next one is, yes, Sith Clone Wars, of freaking course it's coming back. For Sith Clone Wars, I'm going to shoot for February. Little problem with the editor, I don't understand, but whatever, we'll figure it out. But Sith Clone Wars Season 4, and then, sorry, that was a weird face, and then Season 5 is something I'm going to work on. You see that whiteboard right there? That whiteboard is going to be filled with all the Sith Clone Wars stuff, so super excited for that. Next thing is, between Season 4 and Season 5 of the Sith Clone Wars, I'm going to drop a mini-series. I haven't decided what yet. I'm between two ideas, and one of them is the final season of Earth. So somewhere between, 4 to 6 episodes as a mini-series, and then Season 5 of Sith Clone Wars, or maybe a medieval Star Wars story. I don't know. I'm kind of figuring it out, but those are some ideas that I've been working on. The next... this is also exciting. The next thing I am going to announce, this is not the big announcement, I'm still getting there. The big announcement I'm saving for because I really want to show you guys and I think you guys are going to love it. Next thing I'm announcing though is new channels. I've already been working on the cinema channel PPC that some of you guys have found and picked up on, and I'm very proud of the work I do on that channel. That channel is really challenging because it's a completely different style than what I do here on ppsw, but that one, and I'm going to be working on a what if channel and then another what if channel for history, and it might go from there. I also am going to be adding some more short stories, so if you've seen the ppsws, the shorts channel, I'm not going to be doing proper shorts. I'm going to do short stories that are kind of meant to fit inside canon. So one of them is what Yoda and Vernestra talked about in Acolyte, or the time that Anakin and Barriss became friends, and it's kind of a way to tie in what I do with the what if stories on SW to canon, to kind of make it like a head canon kind of thing. But those are just different types of channels I want to introduce this year. It's not like I'm going to take away from what I do here on SW because I love ppsw. I just want to announce that I'm doing some other fun things. But what I've been working on, what I've been trying to deliver on, this has been in the works for forever and way longer than I wanted to work on it. But I am announcing an animation. Yeah, it's pretty cool. So here's some characters. It's going under the title project of Elpis. I'm not telling you what it's about. I'm just going to tell you that I'm announcing an animation that I'm hoping to be done with at some point this year, that I started with a little bit earlier this past year in 25. So here are some early models for you guys. I'm beyond psyched. I actually got these models today, And yeah, so I hope you guys are excited. Again, I just wanted to say thank you to all of you. I know this is a long update, but it's an update and a gratitude, and I appreciate all of you guys. You guys have made this all possible, and you guys have supported me through the hardest year and 2 years pretty much of my life, and I'm eternally grateful for all of that. So thank you all. I love you all with everything in my heart, and enjoy today's video.
Hello.
Our story begins with a short moment between Yoda and Mace Windu. Anakin Skywalker, beyond their knowledge, was murdering Tusken Raiders on the planet of Tatooine. Yoda could only sense the great pain that young Skywalker was experiencing, and he worried for what would come from it. While they didn't know what Anakin was actively doing at this moment, they assumed he was still on Naboo. There couldn't be anything on Naboo to cause him such great suffering aside from visions. Obi-Wan, prior to their assignment to protect Senator Amidala, spoke to the Council about Anakin's varied visions. Not all of them came true, but he experienced some really big ups and some really low downs. The Force had a clutch on Anakin, and it didn't necessarily let him go. It's how Obi-Wan framed it, and this sentiment that both Yoda and Mace knew came to the forefront of their minds in this moment. If Yoda was sensing this great disturbance from a galaxy away, he knew it was important. It pushed the two leaders of the Jedi Order to discuss something unethical. They wanted to speak to Anakin about his potential visions when he returned to the capital, but their consensus, at this given moment, without any context, was that if this terrible pain was caused by visions, then they should intervene. Not to say that the counselors wanted to control Anakin or even force him into a bubble on Coruscant, but they wanted to protect him from himself. Their worry, especially in the light of Sifo Dyas's creation on Kamino, was that Anakin's visions would push him to do something erratic. If someone, not the Chosen One, could be capable of creating an entire clone army, one that within months would have well over 1 million units, then what could the Chosen One do? Of course, it's fair to say that he'd have less access to Jedi funds and far less experience than a 60-plus-year-old Master of the Force, but Sifo Dyas was a Jedi Counselor. His actions for his status and age were outrageous. What would the actions of a 19-year-old, emotionally unstable powerhouse in the Force be capable of? So they schemed and created a plan for Yoda to enact. The Grand Master, again, did not want to control Anakin. He wanted to protect him from himself. The Force could be misleading, sometimes outright hard to decipher. If Skywalker could feel such great pain, then what would he experience with a vision that gave him insight into something like a war? Being that the Clone Wars and the battle at Geonosis hadn't started, there was a hope that the galactic conflict wouldn't come. It went a long way for refuting that Sifo Dyas's visions had any weight to them, i.e., a way to say, he was wrong for doing what he did. Was it wrong of the counselors to come to this conclusion? Absolutely. But they also realized that whatever Master Kenobi had done as an instructor wasn't enough of what Skywalker needed. To coach the Chosen One into healthily understanding his visions and developing appropriate reactions to them would take time. So until they could trust Anakin, they would assist him from the sidelines without directly interfering. Yoda would give Skywalker visions meant to coax him away from darkness. If the Force intended to hurt Anakin, which even Yoda knew was a ridiculous speculation to have, then he would protect him. The Grand Master understood that the ethics of doing this were wrong, yet it should be noted that both Jedi Masters were so on edge because of the Sifo Dyas case on Kamino. Had the Jedi not discovered a massive clone army with the tab for its huge cost going to the Republic, they probably wouldn't have cared that much. Everything was really just a matter of ensuring that damage could not be done by Anakin to himself or those around him, because the last time they had someone with a wild mind and erratic visions, they created an entire clone army. It'd be best for everyone if they could simply avoid doing that again. This plan of Yoda's and Windu's wouldn't go into effect until after the Battle of Geonosis. Of course, the two Jedi would discuss the ethics of it once again, especially in light of Sifo Dyas's visions about a great war becoming reality. It spun the entire situation on its head for them. They had just been proven invalid for wanting to give Skywalker forced visions of happier results to avoid a catastrophic event. Yet Sifo Dyas, now 10 years gone, had just saved the galaxy from a separatist threat. No one believed the Confederacy would become a thing, and now it was. Scytho Diaz had seen that thanks to the Force. Now, if the Jedi restricted Anakin, then what would that mean for him? He could have war-defining visions, something that could bring an end to the conflict, the Sith, and bring balance to the Force. They could withhold that from him by accident. If they filled his mind with different visions, ones to relax him, then he could completely miss something that could save everyone. But the one reason they did not backtrack and completely shut down this idea was the pain. Neither had the context that new Jedi Knight Anakin Skywalker slaughtered a band of Tusken Raiders. Yoda's sense for the pain didn't encapsulate death or murder. It only depicted suffering, agony, and distress. Anakin needed them, and he would never openly come to them. It should be said that they didn't connect the dots. They didn't realize that Anakin's inability to come to them for comfort and help was an additional part of his internal distress. But hey, if they could change his visions, surely it would save the war, Anakin, and the Jedi Order. Though, and this wasn't said to the Master of the Order, a dastardly idea arrived in Yoda's mind. Something that not even he wanted to discuss with another elder. It was too wrong, too controlling, but it could give him insight into the things that Skywalker might be seeing. A pathway to seeing the future and assisting him from afar. Of course, that assisting could then be flipped on its head into stopping, restricting, controlling, or withholding if Yoda wasn't careful. The Grand Master was going to search the archives for a method to accessing the young Jedi's visions. If he could see into the future with Anakin, using the Chosen One as a vessel, then perhaps he could help him. It always, in scenarios like this, starts with help. Yoda's intentions were honorable. He had good intent because he wanted to give Anakin guidance from the sidelines, but even he didn't consider how he might react if he saw something dark. What would Yoda do if Skywalker had a vision of turning to the dark side, destroying millions, or worse, joining the Sith? Anakin could very easily upset the balance, which was already quite disoriented with the whole war. But he could also destroy balance, make sure it never returned. What would Yoda do if he saw that? Obviously, he needed to figure out how to look into Anakin's head in the first place, but if he saw that kind of future, could he stop himself from reacting? Not even Yoda knew, because saying no in the hypothetical is easy, living it is different. Despite this unknown, his false sense of security led him into the Jedi archives to begin his research. Seeing Anakin's visions would be a challenge, giving him alternative ones was the easy part. Skywalker, on the other hand, entered the Clone Wars without a concern in his mind. He didn't think that the Grand Master and Master of the Order were scheming against him. He just had to move on from his losses. Losing Shmi was a challenge, especially because of how it happened. But he had a war to fight, a galaxy to protect, with visions and memories to try and forget. The war kicked off with very little Force-inspired visions. Yoda couldn't see into Anakin's mind from afar, and the little ketamine frog wouldn't be sneaking in the young Skywalker's bedroom to read his mind while he slept. That'd be creepy. The challenge existed because he needed to understand what Skywalker saw from a distance, but just simply connecting to Anakin and planting positive visions into his head was easy. All Yoda needed was that connection, which the two of them already kind of had. So, even with some very minor showings of the future, they weren't as vile or life-changing as what Anakin saw about his mother. Skywalker had visions about battles. Basically, the Force was helping him prepare for war. He was already an outside-the-box thinker, and thanks in part to the Force, he had an upper hand against the Separatist opponents. Now, the Force didn't make him win, but it made some minor corrections to strategies he'd spent all day working on. These were just little boosts, just an extension of his focus on the war he was forced into, a focus he had even in his sleep. Yoda's implanted visions were not war-related. They came to young Skywalker like gifts. When war was the only thing filling his mind, there was then the relief of peace. Anakin wasn't exactly the most optimistic person in the galaxy, and this injected that into his heart. there was a pretty discernible difference between visions and dreams. For Jedi, it usually was the clarity of it all. A dream bounces around, has no direction nor any control. A vision, though, is real. It feels like living, but from the third point of view. It's as if you're living the moment, but from outside yourself. Everything is experienced and felt, and there is a motive behind all of it. A Jedi can just sense that the Force is speaking to them directly. So when Anakin had visions gifted from Yoda about the end of the war, he felt peace. He could see himself with his friends, who Yoda knew about. Of course, the Grand Master wasn't privy to Anakin's marriage, but he knew Skywalker and Senator Amidala were close friends, so that's what Anakin saw. He and Padme were hanging out at Mount Umaid in the Grand Plaza on Coruscant. Obi-Wan, Yoda, and Anakin meditated together in a field of grass near a war memorial. Anakin could see celebrations in the streets that rivaled the grandeur of the triumph at Naboo a decade before. These visions took a lot out of Yoda. He was considerably weaker because of this, and sometimes less focused in council sessions because he wasn't resting well enough. But Yoda would do it for Anakin. He would do it for any one of his Jedi. That's what he convinced himself he was doing. He wouldn't have used this word directly, but he loved all of them. They were his family, his children, his Jedi Order. So while these visions spread out across weeks and months, the weakened Grand Master had satisfaction. He may have not been able to see into Skywalker's mind, but he could see it when Anakin returned to their home. Anakin walked with a pep in his step. His smile was a beating spark for young Jedi and even old ones inside the temple. The war was horrible, horrific, and it took a toll. But Anakin's simple change, the one that made his heart soar with hope, gave that very same hope to every single peer that encountered him. As the war progressed and Anakin took on his apprentice, these same feelings of positivity continued. The Force wasn't as aggressive with its visions as it had been before the war, and Yoda considered even pulling back a little, which to a degree he had to because he couldn't keep up with how much he had been doing at the beginning of the war. But he also wanted to know what Skywalker was seeing. That urge just kept pulling at him. Truthfully though, Anakin wasn't seeing much. It's kind of the irony of all of this. The intensity of which Yoda was keyed into Anakin's turmoil rarely flared up again. It was a unique moment, and the Grand Master should have known better. But this didn't mean that the Chosen One was a blank slate. He could be sometimes, but his focus remained on the war and in instructing his student. It was really just a continuous game for him. What Yoda did helped Anakin create a more positive outlook on everything, but he also needed to be present in the moment. So there was this nice ebb and flow for young Skywalker because he could always go back and reminisce about the future he saw in what he thought were actual visions. He knew that all of it would work out in the end. He and Padme would be open about their relationship and actually date in public. He and his student, Master, and Yoda would all commemorate the war together and grow closer as a Jedi lineage. Just in knowing that, and knowing everything would work out gave him closure. This was because of Yoda. How he kept that balance was focus and meditation. While Anakin never was the type for following the Force or letting it dictate his life, he found that even he needed to let go every so often. He was intense. Skywalker took on every challenge like it was his last, and it's partially why he was so successful in almost everything he did. He never gave up, and he took it personally if he failed. Now though, because he had these visions of the end of the war, and visions that helped him win battles, he recognized that there was a time and a place. For a young 20-year-old Jedi Knight in the First Galactic War over a millennium, it was hard to find balance inside the chaos. Many Jedi Masters struggled with this concept, but it almost came naturally to him, thanks to Yoda. So instead of taking his day and his anger and his frustration out on his starship by modifying it, or Ahsoka's, he took time to be with the Force. This was something he also taught Ahsoka. It wasn't conventional, nor was it traditional. Of course, nothing ever was with Anakin, but it helped him break it down into an easier format for himself, and it actually still worked out pretty well for Ahsoka. They still modified their starships and did repairs together, but they didn't use it as a crutch for the mental anguish that war put onto them. It was a nice way for the two Jedi to bond as master and apprentice without chaos. Meditations were peaceful, they were relaxing, and they took both Jedi away from the stress they were constantly under. This was Anakin's choice. No one forced this choice onto him. But all good things can never last. A new challenge must come, and the individual must rise to meet it. Yoda's work to challenge the Force was going well until the Dark Lord of the Sith, shrouded in frustration, made a countermove unknowingly. He could feel the twisting of Anakin's heart. The darkness that consumed him in the massacre of the Tusken camp was dying. There was a fire of burning hatred that existed within every being, but every soul controlled it, muted it, kept it away. Only the Sith were so weak that they allowed that hatred to control them. Anakin now was truly owning that darkness and putting it away. He knew he didn't need the dark side of the Force. He needed the light. He was the light, and the Sith Lord wanted to drag him down into the depths. Sidious, not knowing about Yoda's deception, started creating his own ritual for young Skywalker, the perfect mix of alchemy to corrupt Anakin. See, Sidious at this point, early into the war, was designing a plan to turn Skywalker earlier. He realized that because of Anakin's turn towards the light, he needed a counterbalance. Palpatine wanted Skywalker to fall to the dark side before the end of the war, instead of turning at the same time the war concluded. This change coincided with another plan. Palpatine would have Skywalker become his apprentice and openly separate from the Jedi Order. In his separation from the Order, he would challenge Count Dooku to a duel and kill him, ending the Clone War, where the Jedi could not. Sidious, by using this publicity for Anakin, would turn the people against the Jedi and kick them off of Coruscant. The public execution of the Order would not be known to the galaxy. Palpatine really didn't even want Anakin to be a part of the slaughter, not because he didn't trust him, but because he wanted Anakin to be so far removed from the Jedi that he wouldn't even think about them in the destruction. That comes back to the alchemy. Palpatine's spell would offer Anakin alternative scenarios where his apprentice, master, friends, and wife would die in certain death. He consistently would have no control over these scenarios. On the battlefield, Anakin would watch those he cared about dying. From across the stars, he would see Padme die to assassins. Palpatine unknowingly was creating the perfect counter to Yoda's vision work. He practiced the rituals, the alchemy, perfected it, and prepared to begin working it into Anakin's life. The Master of Ahsoka sat in his room, meditating on the Force, pulling in various sources of inspiration and allowing it to seep into his soul. He didn't feel incapable of finding the path. It was just beyond him. Thanks to Yoda, he was cruising through life with a direction. He understood that the path to ending the war would be difficult, but if he simply remained patient, it would come. It was perhaps the best lesson he developed after receiving the first series of mixed visions from Yoda. Yet something incredible came from it as well. The Force actually started to mimic what Yoda started. Not to a lying degree, nor a deceptive one. Rather, it would show him nearby moments in time. Like specifically an example with Padme. He would see a vision of them meeting up with each other, with kisses and hugs inside of her apartment. And of course, when he'd return to Coruscant, that's exactly how it would transpire. The Force made these happy visions a reality. They would come true. So the Force adapted part of these various visions, but it didn't change the fact that Anakin was still seeing alternative futures that would never come. It intrigued Anakin to reach these moments that were just false narratives provided by Yoda. They would come in time and he would live them out. But then the darkness came. In this specific meditation, he could see the illuminating future with a scintillating tone. The people were warm, the feelings even more so. He was thrilled, happy, and comfortable. The war was clearly over. Celebrations had even come to an end. People were just happy to be alive and to feel as such. It was the pleasant experience that Anakin had come to accept as his destined future, thanks to Yoda. Then something shifted. The vision slipped and he felt the people all change. Slowly, one of them dropped dead, and he watched the others flee. Into various directions they went, and the clones fired down on them. The first of Sidious's decisions was to sow distrust into Anakin's own men. He needed to start worrying about them rather than just trusting them. Slowly, Sidious would pick apart every single person and relationship that Anakin trusted, and make them his enemies. Everyone but Palpatine himself, of course. It rolled like a curse through Skywalker's body. It hit him with such a shock of pain that he fell backwards and out of the meditation. It hadn't been since his pre-Geonosis visions that he'd experienced something like that. His heart hurt, and he immediately wondered why the clones would turn on Ahsoka, Obi-Wan, Yoda, and himself. It made no sense, but it was concerning to say the least. Anakin held his hand to his chest and let the thumping slow under his palm. He breathed in for a moment and then released. His thoughts were rampant, but if he had learned anything since Yoda started the visions on him, it was patience. Anakin got himself back up to his seat and crossed his legs. He would return to his meditation and discover the reason behind all of this. What initially started as a hope to understand the Force and what he saw with the clones became an exodus into his mind. Hours of the night were spent looking for answers, and instead of finding a source, he found the Force itself. Because both Sidious and Yoda were toying with his mind, and he decided to chase it, the Force itself reacted. Skywalker found the light and the dark. Each had an ending he appreciated and despised. It transformed into a constant tug and pull. By chasing the unnatural vision provided by Sidious, he welcomed it into his mind. Anakin had been complacent, not in a negative way, but with the visions from Yoda because they all had positive outcomes. They brought warm and happy feelings to his heart. He had no reason to be suspicious of them. Palpatine's, though, they made him uneasy and worried. There was an anxiety that filled his soul, and so he chased after it to discover what it meant. Because Anakin could not believe a singular future where the clones would ever turn on him and his friends. This was an error, something that he could not believe. The Force never reacted to these invasive visions from Yoda because Anakin never minded them. He never went after them to discover where they came from. Yet when he followed after the visions from Palpatine, he opened up an entirely new world for himself, where what Palpatine and Yoda tried to do to him no longer mattered. The Force itself would give him varying visions that showed him alternative realities. This no longer would come from Palpatine nor Yoda. Initially, after he chased the clone betrayal vision, he found nothing except a little blue flame flickering away in the corners of his mind. Once extinguished, he thought nothing of it. But in the weeks after the clone vision, he started to have back-to-back visions of the same thing. One scenario of a battle going overwhelmingly positive, followed by a minor mistake that caused Yularen or Ahsoka to die by an explosion. In reality, neither outcome came to fruition. Skywalker, Ahsoka, and his division won the battle, but not in the fashion presented by the first vision. It slowly started to creep up on him. While Palpatine and Yoda both thought they were making an impact, their visions were simply being absorbed by the Force and pumped out in a completely different arrangement for Anakin to see. Skywalker really didn't know what to believe or not believe anymore. There was also an incredibly easy way to tell that the visions shifted. When Yoda and Sidious implanted them into his head, they were always of the far future. The end of the war showed a grown-up Ahsoka usually, someone who was closer to Anakin's age on Geonosis. There were more gray hairs in Obi-Wan's head, to show that the time had indeed passed. Once the Force took back control over these visions, the visions weren't far away. At maximum, as they had been with his mother, the visions would only ever be 30 or so days away from the present moment. And it was weird too. Prior to his chase, the visions that came naturally were simply him reliving them in the present moment, understanding that what he saw was the will of the Force. Of course, with Yoda's, he never could know that because they were so far in the future, but he believed it'd come reality. Whereas, because the visions showed alternative futures in this moment, he felt a weird deja vu. It was dreamlike, Nothing aligned naturally as the visions depicted. Rather, everything existed in this weird little middle area where he was living close to either the light or the dark, but never fully with either. It meant that the Force was being an untrustworthy storyteller. He couldn't decide what to believe and what not to, and being on the battlefront with a 15-year-old Padawan who didn't know how to solve this problem didn't make it any easier. Because Yoda thought he was still making a positive difference, he didn't think anything of Anakin's request to meet with him once he returned to Coruscant. The Grand Master would listen to Anakin's situation and truthfully not know what to do. Of course, he could be honest and tell Skywalker what he had been up to, but the dark side was not something he would ever impart onto Anakin. Yoda didn't really know what to think of the fact that Anakin was feeling pulled back and forth by these visions. It was beyond unnatural, especially since when Yoda did put visions into Anakin's head, they were always of the far future, not a couple weeks later, several months to a couple years away. It was beyond unnatural, especially since when Yoda did put visions into Anakin's head, they were always of the far future, several months to a couple years away. Things that weren't even accurate or close to happening, something just to look forward to. It was a dream presented in vision fashion. This, what Anakin was experiencing, was completely different, and Yoda promised young Skywalker to conduct a thorough investigation with Jocasta Nu, per Anakin's permission. Skywalker, desperate to simply understand these alternative futures, allowed the two Jedi Masters to run tests on him and examine him during his rest. It would be during this examination that they would learn that Yoda wasn't the only one participating in this imparting of visions. Someone else had their grips on young Skywalker, and the Jedi didn't know how to figure out who it was. Just going into someone's mind to see their dreams and visions was challenging enough. Figuring out the source of where they came from was something else entirely. Despite the two Jedi Masters trying to get to the bottom of everything, Anakin still felt pulled, and what made matters worse, the visions themselves were growing more intense and even darker. Not to say that there weren't alternative futures with a light side outcome, but it was more brutal. He wouldn't just lose a duel to Dooku, he'd have his arms removed and he'd watch someone else incinerate them. It wouldn't just be fighting General Grievous and losing, but he'd be the one that failed an entire class of younglings that Grievous intercepted. It was terrible. He couldn't do anything to stop it, and so, with Jocasta and Yoda working arduously to find a cure, Anakin did the unthinkable. He decided the necessary path was to cut himself off from the Force, temporarily. The war was at its exact middle point, the time in which the tides of the war were finally turning. The Republic was getting crushed, and now they were starting to win again. They were no longer only losing battles. Anakin could afford to cut himself off from the Force for a short period of time. He simply refused to connect with the Force, so he could meditate without it inside of his ear. And for once, Anakin slept peacefully. The future wasn't always thrown in his face. He simply relaxed his mind, which then led to a calm heart and calmer body. There was no tension when he slept without the Force. Even his dreams were simple and kind to him. He wasn't swimming in nightmares. The Jedi always suggested that one should be careful when sensing the future, but he had been living in the future for well over a year. It was nice to exist without it forcibly being shoved down his throat. He slept well and woke up with a new outlook on life. Whether or not the Force had done this to him, he did not know. What he did know is that this war was taking a toll, and he needed to figure out a way to end it, so that he could connect to the Force again. Anakin sat with himself, without the Force, and meditated dedicatedly to come to a conclusion. While he did this, the two Jedi Masters continued to struggle to come to any sort of conclusion. Sidious was still trying to implant visions, and nothing was coming through. Anakin controlled where the Force came from, and he cut it off at its roots. It was bad for him, absolutely, but he needed the freedom. He had to escape the voices wandering between his ears. With time for himself and a fully functional mind, he started to find the answers he needed to end this war. By removing himself from his connection to the Force, Anakin believed he found a pathway to resolution. He came to the conclusion that only a Sith could be behind this attack on his soul, so he, in the middle of the night, abandoned the Jedi Temple for Sereno. Skywalker refused to open himself back up to the Force without having first destroyed the one who he thought was responsible for this. It was all so confusing to begin with. The multiple visions, the continuous flurry of them, but the dark, it had to come from the dark side. The clones would never turn on their Jedi brethren. It made no sense to him, and as a result, he dedicated himself to stopping Dooku. Much like it was when he left the capital, he'd arrive at Dooku's home under the cover of darkness. The Count was sleeping, uninvolved in whatever turmoil Anakin was undergoing. Anakin was without connection to the Force, completely a blur to anyone with connection to the Force. Only one Sith would ever be so eager to turn Anakin to the dark side, and he actually wasn't on this planet. Anakin didn't know that though, so he snuck into the facility, using a sewage system that ran beneath the castle. It wasn't the most pleasant experience ever, but it provided him with the opportunity to break into the Count's bedroom, where he slept ever so peacefully. Tyrannus, student of Yoda, master of Qui-Gon, had done many wrongs in his life, but this specific wrong was not his burden. His senses activated when Anakin's saber ignited, but by then it was already too late. He flung his lightsaber into his hands and Skywalker shoved his down into Dooku's chest. It was a moment that he couldn't have reacted to any better than he had. Anakin killed him. No, Anakin assassinated the Count of Sereno. His life was over in a flash of the saber's deactivation. Anakin looked at his hands and stepped away from the lifeless body, wondering if he was free. Slowly, he allowed the Force to seep back into his soul. It felt fresh for just a second, and in that second, he felt free again. His eyes closed, and the rush of life that powered the galaxy filled his soul. It was relieving to him until he could sense the turmoil that forced him to separate from the Force. Anakin, still so confused, went to the nearby control console, fending off a few of Dooku's guards in the process. Surely the only way to stop these visions was by ending the war then. So he sent out a shutdown command to the droid army from Dooku's very control station. There were only a few individuals in the entire galaxy with this kind of power, and Tyrannus was one of them. Immediately across the galaxy, battlefronts blew up in the face of the Separatists. Important leaders like Admiral Trench and General Grievous would be stuck in the middle of engagements without any active battle droids. They couldn't do anything, but watch their fleets collapse under the fire of their opponent's turbo cannons. It was a sweep, like opening a door, where hundreds of Separatist outposts, fleets, and armies were wiped out in only a matter of minutes. This didn't last forever, because the Separatists still had their war council, and they reversed the order. But by the point that they did, the damage had been done, not only to the Separatist war machine, but to young Skywalker, who disappointedly returned to Coruscant, without having truly accomplished anything for himself. He confessed to the Grand Master what he had done, and honestly, Yoda couldn't blame Anakin. This, from Yoda's perspective, was his fault. They could search for a source of the dark visions all they wanted, but the reality was that a Jedi had tried to control the Force. Yoda was that Jedi. All who gain power wished to maintain it. The Grand Master sought to control what shouldn't be controlled, and what certainly couldn't be. Anakin paid the price for it, and while he wouldn't return to cutting himself off from the Force, he and Yoda needed to make a new approach. A very important lesson, something that went all the way back to what Shmi had told Anakin before he left Tatooine for the first time. You can't stop the change any more than you can stop the suns from setting. It's a lesson that both the youthful and the elderly needed to learn. Anakin's confession came with no punishment, rather an embrace of knowledge. Yoda would begin teaching Anakin how to control his reactions to visions. Was it hypothetical? Absolutely. But Yoda couldn't stomach the idea of Anakin learning that the Grand Master had done this to him. In other words, Yoda was quote-unquote protecting Anakin from the truth again. The lessons developed into how to see the visions, see the pain, see the good, the dark, and all of it, and just let it pass. Anakin was not at fault, but the lesson transformed into letting everything sit with Anakin for a moment, so that he could process it, and then once he did, let it go. He wouldn't chase the visions of the dark side future. It didn't matter if Obi-Wan, Padme, or Ahsoka died, nor if the clones turned on the Republic. Anakin would let it go. It didn't matter if the Force gave him the light to fix the galaxy. He had to let all of it go. Because what Anakin needed, most of all, was to control only what he could. These visions of future light and future dark were only beacons of information, things that very realistically could happen, but were so far beyond what Anakin could actually control. His actions on Sereno made a difference, they truthfully did, but the mental anguish he endured just to get there was not a burden he needed to undertake. He should be free to instruct his Padawan, finish the war, and celebrate the end, not constantly struggle through the continuous loop of unnatural, unrelated visions. He couldn't control everything. He needed to let go of his illusion of control. And as true as that was for Skywalker and controlling the future, it also very much so applied to Yoda, who started all of this to begin with. Anakin's traumatic loss of his mother was terrible, but he needed to stop pretending that he could have controlled that. He needed to stop believing that he could have done something different to change her fate. He had to let go. Yoda did too, and they both understood that now. Skywalker's little trick on Sereno changed the war around. It gave the Republic a huge leg up that they wouldn't have had otherwise. Without Dooku and Grievous in the picture, the Separatist government got cold feet. The wartime council certainly had their interests in continuing the war, but they were invested financially in the conflict. They didn't care about losses or planets. If the two leaders of the CIS were gone, then who would lead them next? Well, Sidious tried to force his hand, but the separate government, unaffiliated with the Sith, chose one of their own people, someone who started to reject the pleas of the Separatist War Council to continue the war. It allowed the Republic to make more aggressive pushes for victory, while the government tried to make a decision for itself. This predated the military expansion bill inside the Senate, meaning that Palpatine couldn't even try and force the Republic to back down. The Senate knew that their troop numbers weren't as impressive as they were at the war's beginning, but they also registered that victory was in their hands if they pushed a little harder. Without Grievous, no one feared the CIS. They were dead in the water, waiting to lose. No one could compare to the droid general, and it forced Palpatine into a corner. The worst part is, he wanted this too. He wanted Anakin to kill Dooku before the end of the war. He just never thought that by wanting it, that it would become an assassination. He tried to roll back plans, force the Jedi into a position to look bad, and even turn Anakin to the dark side. But little really worked for Palpatine. He'd continue to try and force negative visions into Anakin's mind, but as was said before, all of that was taken over by the Force and given back to Skywalker in a myriad of types. Yet none of these visions affected Skywalker as much as they would have prior to Dooku's murder. Anakin was just taking all of it in and just allowing it to be. He didn't concern himself with what he could control nor stop. It was as simple as that. Palpatine had nothing over Anakin, nothing aside from taking the people he loved most. But because the war was at its end, Skywalker wasn't even on the front lines. Yoda specifically requested for Anakin to be brought back to the capital so they could work on things together. It's actually what led directly to the destruction of the Sith. After a meditation session just a few weeks before the Confederacy offered their official surrender to the Republic, Anakin went to visit his friend Palpatine. Ever since Anakin returned to the capital, they'd been talking more. Sidious was making headway, at least he thought he was. They had discussed the death of Dooku, and Anakin even confessed what he had done because he trusted Palpatine. This, for the Sith Lord, was a realization that he made it far too difficult on himself to turn Anakin. All he ever needed to do was just speak to Skywalker. The cross-galaxy manipulation with visions obviously was too difficult, and even more unnecessary. So after the aforementioned meditation with Yoda on this specific day, Palpatine tried his luck, and it was too far. He told Anakin that they were similar, their stories and paths aligned. Anakin was confused until the Sith Lord told him that their natural direction in life was the dark side. He pleaded with Anakin that he teach him the ways of the Force to save him. To Palpatine, he really thought that all the visions were getting through, but decided that it was just too much effort at this point. He had no idea that every single plant he put into Anakin's head manifested into something else with the Force. It also didn't help that Anakin's training specifically involved processing and rejecting these various alternative visions. So Palpatine thought that Anakin would be worried about Padme's life, when in reality, Anakin only cared about what he could control. Yet, here he was again, in front of a very powerful political figure that could easily be killed by his hand. Palpatine just told him that he was the Sith Lord, and Anakin ignited his lightsaber. Sidious didn't fear Skywalker. He wanted this. He knew he had gotten under Anakin's skin with the visions. Little did either of them know that the Grand Master was following Anakin. Anakin forgot something in their meditation, and Yoda's old legs didn't carry him as fast as Anakin's youthful ones did. It was Anakin's meditation journal, something that they had both been using to practice letting go. But when Yoda walked into the executive office, he didn't see a standoff between the Chosen One and the Chancellor. He saw Anakin hovering over a dead man in the middle of his office. It shocked him, but he didn't react by igniting his own saber. He could see the relief in Anakin's face, as if a curse had been broken. It was in this moment that Anakin realized that all of his turmoil came from Palpatine. It had to have been him that was putting those dark-sided visions into his head. And while it was partially true, the Force was still going to give him a multitude of future visions that conflicted with one another, regardless of Palpatine dying by his hands. Yoda, not fully grasping what had happened, listened as Anakin rushed through the story of the truth, that Palpatine was a Sith Lord, and now they could end the war. Yoda thought quickly, and then promised to get Anakin out of the situation. The following plan involved a fake lightsaber duel, where the two of them would fight their way through the corridors of the executive building, and Skywalker would escape, having murdered both Dooku and Palpatine. The Jedi would provide Anakin with anything and everything he needed for the rest of his life, but he could no longer be in the public eye. It was a deal that Anakin actually agreed to because he had enough of the war, and the publicity that came with being leader of the 501st. The visions took any joy he had with that out of him. It may have seemed convoluted and even hard to make work, but Yoda's plan surprisingly worked well. And ironically, with the Separatists surrendering regardless of Palpatine's assassination, many people inside the Republic and Confederacy wondered if Anakin had saved them all. It wasn't a widespread theory. Many people on both sides thought that they would lose the war without their leaders, which was actually the truth for the Separatists. But there was a growing belief, especially from the Republic, that Anakin's murder of the two heads of state saved the galaxy from more years of endless conflict. It made Skywalker become a pop icon amongst friendly debates and political ones too. Was he actually a hero or a villain? Could one Jedi acting so recklessly end the galaxy-spanning war? He was clearly a Republic loyalist, but maybe he knew something that no one else knew. That circulated for a long time after he disappeared, while the Jedi focused on bringing a peaceful conclusion to what had already been a terrible war. Yoda made sure Padme knew the truth about Anakin's assassination on the Chancellor, and he cleared up the duel, which brought her comfort. Anakin of course went back to Naboo, where the Jedi, as promised, would provide him and his family with everything they needed. Skywalker, as the galaxy reformed thanks to his actions, spent most of his time trying to understand the great mystery of the Force. He sort of, in his own way, became a truer Jedi than he would have otherwise. He embraced the Force with his entire being. He finished Ahsoka's training, thanks to the Council's permission, and he watched the galaxy from afar come back together. As he grew older, Yoda and Obi-Wan continued to train with him, meditate with him, until they both became physically unable to. The truth about the visions from Yoda never came to light, but even if they did, Anakin likely wouldn't have been too upset. He got his life back. Palpatine became the scapegoat for the entire situation anyways, and while these multitude of visions continued to plague Anakin's mind, he did come to another resolution. Despite knowing that he should only focus on what he could control, he also learned how to actually interpret these visions. There were multiple futures, light, dark, and now neutral. but the similarities between all 3, 4, 5, sometimes 6 became the reality. This is how he learned how he would become a father, and later on a grandfather. There were tragic events that were prevented by his control because he was able to put the pieces together like a puzzle. Anakin became the Jedi Master that Sifo Dyas never could have. He understood the great deal of patience that came with sensing the future. Instead of rush action, he planted himself firmly within the Force and listened to the waves that spoke to him. By combining these various visions, he not only helped maintain balance in the Force, but stopped countless attempts to disrupt the galactic peace that he also brought to the people. And in the years after his assassinations, his life on Naboo would be great. And in the years after his 2 assassinations, his face faded from the public, allowing him the chance to exist normally with his family, with the Jedi he loved, and as himself, the truest version of self that was Anakin Skywalker. And that, my friends, is a very convoluted and kind of wholesome PP story for the new year. Special thanks to all the patrons for supporting the channel. Again, just gonna announce it if you missed it earlier. Getting ready for a cool animation for you guys. There's some things on the screen. Pretty cool. Pretty excited about it. Otherwise, let's talk about this story. This story was probably one of the hardest ones to explain in story. It's just very convoluted, and the direction I went with it was kind of meant to be convoluted. It's that both Palpatine and Yoda are putting these visions into Anakin's head, and they mess with him. It messes with his head, and at a certain point, he chases the vision, the one that Palpatine gives him, the dark side one, the one that he doesn't believe is possible, and it kind of disrupts the ebb and flow of everything. It kind of just lets the Force know that he's willing to accept multiple visions that aren't natural. It definitely doesn't follow the rules of what you see in Revenge of the Sith, because there's not multiple futures of that, right? It's not like Anakin seeing like a vision of Padme and him on Naboo raising their family. It's only Padme dying. It's only consistently that, and that vision's being forced onto him. In this scenario, he fully chases it through the Force, whereas Anakin tries to find real-world example, or whereas Anakin in Revenge of the Sith tries to find real-world solutions, he in this story chases after it inside the Force, which is the only reason it latches, and it creates this alternative scenario where he has to deal with these multitude of visions. I wanted this story to be both a very spiritual one, but also one that's hyper-aware of the hypocrisy of the Jedi Order. This is very much so an Anakin Yoda story. It's very toxic. It's intentionally built to be that way, whereas Yoda's trying to help, and he actually kind of makes the situation worse. Well, yes, the Clone War ends, and he doesn't become Vader. He's also really messing with Anakin. So it's like Anakin has to take on the burden of all this trial and struggle, but it does end up resulting in the better outcome, ironically. As for like not having these big duels, I really kind of like this idea where Anakin is just so eager to kind of get out of this string of events that he's just doing things just to do it. Like killing Dooku in his sleep, he's able to accomplish because he cut himself off from the Force. Dooku doesn't even sense him. The only reason Dooku knows he's there is because the lightsaber ignites. And same thing with Palpatine. It's like Palpatine is egging Anakin on. He doesn't think Anakin's gonna kill him, but he does in this story. And that's kind of, I thought the cool part of this, where both Dooku and Palpatine kind of go down in no fight scenarios, is that Anakin's just literally trying to stop this from happening to him, and it does result in the better timeline. So I hope you all enjoyed this kind of spiritual, kind of mysterious, kind of convoluted story. I love you all, spread the love, and always remember, my friends, may the Force be with you.